Welcome back to another episode of Breaking Quiet. I'm your host, Mary Beth Hill. I am also a person that is in long term recovery and a woman who has successfully reintegrated society after incarceration. Breaking Quiet is a podcast for women by women, a place where we can lift women's voices up who have experienced incarceration and in recovery. But this time, we're doing something a little different. We are hearing from the family members who have been impacted by others' incarceration and addiction. Today, I'm so super excited to have Madison on with me today. Madison is the daughter to a friend of mine by the name of Brent, and she is here to share her experience of what it's been like as being the daughter of somebody who was an addict and who's experienced incarceration. How are you doing, Madison?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. Take a breath. You're going to be good. I love really just diving into it, without, me telling a lot of your story. I wanna hear it from you, and so kinda tell me, Madison, what your childhood looks like.
I think that mine looks a lot differently from a lot of addicts' children because I was really fortunate to have my grandparents. I lived with my mom until I was about, I don't know, 4 or 5. Um, and I remember things from my childhood, but I also had a really good childhood after from living with my grandparents. So I was really fortunate to have them. And I always think how differently my life is compared to some of the others.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't remember a whole lot from living with my mom. I remember that she was married, um, not to anyone that was good. They were both doing drugs. Of course, I was little at the time. I didn't know any different. I don't remember anything about my dad. Um, I don't remember anything about my dad until I was older, probably 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. I don't have any early childhood memories of him at all. Living with my mom, I remember, like, her husband getting arrested or her husband beating her up and that stuff is like a 3 or 4-year-old that I
Yeah.
can remember and still recall to this day. Um, the When I went to live with my grandparents, her and her husband had gotten arrested, and they lived by my grandparents. And so I think at that point is kind of when my grandparents stepped in and were like, "Okay, like, we need to do
Something different.
something different."
Yeah.
So I've lived with my grandparents until I went to college, from the time I was 4 until I was 18. I had the option to go back and live with my mom, but I loved living with my grandparents.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, we were just talking about this, but, so for the listeners, you guys don't know this, but I've known Madison's family my entire life. Her uncle Walt and I were actually, in school together at a very young age, and so, without her even knowing this, we have been connected for many, many years. But, my kids kinda had that same experience, very, very fortunate that my family was able to step in and take custody of my kids, whenever I was unable to do so, so shout out to those grandparents, right, for taking, for really just taking on the role of mom and dad whenever, we couldn't get it together. Yeah, so your dad, whenever you finally remember him coming into your life, you said you were a little bit older. Do you happen to know if it was because he was incarcerated or he just didn't come around or
I think it may have been a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I have a memory of him coming to my grandparents' house with his girlfriend at the time, and we like played the Wii. Um, and that's probably the first memory that I have. And like I said, I don't really know if it was incarceration, not coming around, or probably a little bit of both. I I remember, and it's so weird just thinking about it, but I remember because my dad's really tall,
Mhm.
and I played basketball when I was younger. I started when I was probably 10, and I remember thinking like, "Huh, my dad's really tall. I wonder if he's ever played basketball. I play basketball, so, like, maybe we can talk about that." My dad, in fact, did not play
Yeah.
basketball. So, it's one of those things where it's like, I didn't know as a young child, I didn't know anything about him, and I didn't know how to communicate with him because I didn't know him.
Yeah.
And so I would see him at my other grandparents' house for, holidays or whatever, but I just don't recall much at all.
And not only that, if you think about it, the relationship with, like, daughters and dads either can go one or 2 ways. Either they're, like, super bonded or it's just kind of a weird relationship
Yeah.
in general. So then whenever you add in, the addiction and the incarceration and all these traumatic factors, I can only imagine that that would make a weird situation as far as trying to get to know, like, your dad.
Yeah.
Yes.
The most previous time that he got out of prison, that's when we, like, really started to get close. We bonded. Um, I was, I don't know, maybe 15, 16 when he got out the last time. He lived where I lived, like, in the same town, and so I was able to see him more frequently. He was doing good, he was working, he was doing dad stuff. I mean, I had a flat tire one time, and he came and changed my tire, and so it's stuff like that that I just remember those things too of, like, what it's like to actually have him around.
Right.
We got to be really, really close. Um, I sorry.
You're okay.
I went to college, um, and he would come and see me when I was up at school. He would work where I was going to school sometimes, so we would go get lunch, or he would just come by the apartment and hang out with me and my now husband. Um, we just had a really good relationship, and I knew that that's who he was as a dad, and so it sucked to have that taken from me because I knew what it was like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. So, like, out throughout your childhood, like, even in those earlier years, was your mom still using at that time too?
I think my mom stopped using when I was about 6, so she's been clean for probably 20 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So, in those moments, right? Like in those early moments, you never experienced, like, as a child, like going to see him in prison, or he just wasn't there.
He just wasn't there. I started going to see him in prison probably I was older, and it was when he was in the Pathway to Freedom
Hmm.
in Wrightsville. That's
Nice.
the first time that I started going to see him. Other than that, I remember we would write each other, and I would have letters from him, and I would write him, and I would send him letters. Um, but until I got older, I didn't start going to see him while he
Yeah.
was incarcerated.
We talk about this a lot in the recovery space about how, and I was just talking about this in the last interview that I did, that we don't ever think about the effect that the addiction has on the families as a whole, right? Like an addiction in one person, say for instance, in a family, you have one person who's an addict and the rest not, but it's genuinely a family disease. Like our children, our parents, anybody that's around us are directly impacted by the choices that we are making. The one thing I talk about all the time too, I get to travel all over the United States and I go into these different spaces and, we talk about how the one I hear it so often from people who are not in addiction, or like they don't understand how people could continue to keep making these choices. And like the best way that I could even describe it or begin to describe it is like we did not choose. We made the choice to do the drugs, but we didn't choose to become an
Right.
addict. And so like after that point of me becoming an addict, and I know it's for the same for your dad too, like that choice was now gone, and we lost all kind of hope and any kind of power that we once had over ourselves and our decision making.
Right.
So he got out of prison, you said, when you were that time.
Maybe 14, 15 or so. I was working, and so I was probably 15, 16. He would come see me at work, and um, I remember I was at a friend's house when he came home, and I had no idea that he was coming home. My grandma just his mom, not the one that raised me, but his mom showed up at my friend's house, and she has my dad, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, he's out." And so I remember us going to Walmart and, like, getting him all his little hygiene stuff, and he stayed with my grandma, and he was clean for, I don't even know, 6 years,
He was.
maybe?
He was clean for 6 years, and I talk about this a lot too, like, there's a very big difference. There was a time in my life whenever, I found out I was pregnant with my oldest son, and I remember telling myself, like, "I'm done," and I was, you know? Um, I was abstinent. Let's say it like that. He was abstinent from drugs for that time, but there's a huge difference, and I've see it in the lives of many people who struggle with addiction from being abstinent and then living in a life of recovery, right? Like, the drugs and the alcohol are genuinely just a symptom of what's wrong with us, right? Like, that was the medication, if you wanna say it like that we used to cope with whatever was going on with us, right? And until a person is able to really look deep and dig deep and do some significant work on themselves, that is whenever they start to really heal, from the disease of addiction. Now, let me just say this. I'm not saying that's the case for everybody because I know a lot of people, I say a lot. I know some people who have been able to just quit and go on about their lives and live their lives. But for people like your dad and I, and your dad and I, and for the listeners, they don't know this. I've known Madison's dad for a long time, like 25 years, and a lot of my story in addiction involves, with your dad. There were times we were together in our addiction. We had a lot of business dealings in I mean, we were just intertwined in each other in addiction. So I can speak for him too. And I know I say this that like he is one of those people who cannot manage life, not for any significant amount of time
Yeah.
on his own, because I can even remember back in those times, like that 6 years when he was not using drugs, he was still drinking, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was drinking, he was smoking cigarettes, he yeah, he was still he he got laid off, and he was working in the oil field, and that is really when I noticed, like, this big shift in him was when he got laid off, and I'll never forget that I was at my cousin's house, and I had known some things were weird being around him or being on the phone, and I was like, "Hmm, that's weird, like, I don't know, this is just weird." But I'll never forget his girlfriend at the time. I was on the phone with her, and she told me, like, "Madison, I think your dad's using again." And I just remember going to my grandparents' house and just crying because he had done good for so long. Despite, like, the drinking
Right.
and smoking cigarettes and stuff, he had done good for so long, and it felt like it was ripped away from me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I tell people all the time, man, like, when people think about getting into recovery and they start to get clean and it's a lot of work, like it really is. Like even at the point I'm at in my life and I'm getting closer and closer to a decade, but like I still go to meetings. I still have a sponsor. I've done therapy off and on throughout the time that I've been clean. And like even in the early parts of my recovery, I tell people, like, I was in a treatment setting some way or shape for almost 4 years for the first part of my recovery because, I found recovery before prison, and then I was in treatment, like, setting the whole time, and then while I was incarcerated, I was in a treatment program in there, and it is an everyday maintenance, right? Like, it's literally like I had to learn like, I can't even say relearn, I had to learn how to live like an adult.
Right.
And that's crazy to think about, right? Because I'm literally 32 years old, and you're like, "How do you not know how to live like an adult?" But that's because my whole childhood and up until that point of me finding recovery in my early 30s, I didn't live like an adult. I didn't have any worries. I lived without any kind of abandon, and I was really just a very self-centered person who only thought about myself,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, and I think that that is something that he does need. Like I said, he did the pathway to freedom, but that was not, like, recovery based. That was more just getting you ready to go back into society.
Right.
I think that he would benefit from some sort of recovery, but he's really hard-headed,
Yes.
and I don't know that he would want to do that. Um, but the last time he got out, I told him, "If you ever do drugs again or you ever go back to prison, I will never speak to you again." And then it happened. And I'm like, I think about it in the back of my head all the time. I'm like, I literally told him I would never speak to him again, but here I am, like, I just can't not.
That's your dad.
It's my dad.
Yeah.
Um, it still sucks and it's hurtful, but at the end of the day, it's my dad. And I was also younger when I said that. And so now as an adult and I have
Right.
my own children, and that's just not realistic to just not speak to him.
I talk about that a lot, like, the love that we have that my kids have had for me, 'cause I tore their worlds apart, you know what I mean? I mean, literally, there's no other way to put it. I was trying to think of a prettier way to say that, but there's not. I especially my oldest, he's the one who really remembers it. He was, almost 11, I think, whenever, I finally found recovery, and, I ripped their worlds apart, but no matter what, like, their love for me is unfailing,
Right,
like, they love me through it all.
right,
No matter what, and, that's a relationship that I still work on with my daughter to this day is, repairing that relationship. She's the one who's really felt the brunt end of it because, my parents took custody of her and she's lived with them for the majority of her life up until recently. But, parenting already is also weird and hard, but, like, that love has always been consistent,
right.
So this last time when your dad, relapsed and what did that look like?
There's bits and pieces that I remember of it. So, like I said, he would come over, he would hang out. I was in college, and so I didn't have just like this abundance of free time. I was also working too. But on the weekends, he would come over for dinner. We would go out to dinner. Um, we were, my husband and I were actually buying our first house, and my dad had a job painting?
Mhm.
Um, and so our house was a rent house. So before we bought it, there was like chips in the walls and the baseboards needed to be redone and just like minor stuff that I knew that my dad would help me with. And I remember we had gone to my house and he had sprayed like the baseboards in my kitchen and my living room and my dining room, but since he was spraying, he had put up, like, a sheet against the wall and, like, taped it to the wall so that the paint wouldn't get on there, and I remember calling him and saying, "Hey, do you think that this is dry yet? Because we're trying to move our stuff in, and I don't wanna have to rearrange everything again to try and get this stuff off of the wall." And he got so mad at me, and I remember telling my husband, I was like, what did I do for him to be mad? Like, what did I say for him to be mad? So that was the first thing that I noticed that was kinda like, "What in the world is going on with him?" Because I had never remembered him in active addiction, I guess, because I was young and I never remembered having those conversations with
Yeah.
him, or so there was just things that he would do that I was like, "This is just not like the dad that I have known these last 6 years." Um, he he just started not coming around. He we didn't talk very much. This is this is something, like, not a lot of people know, but he had given me his credit card while I was in college, gas, groceries, whatever, and that was extremely beneficial because, 1, he hadn't been there at all, and
Yeah.
now he's helping me, and, so I had an aunt that passed away that he was not related to at all, and he had given money for the funeral, and I remember saying something about the money that he had given for the funeral. Well, then that turned around on me, and he got mad at me for asking about money for a funeral, and granted, I probably shouldn't have said anything, it wasn't my money, wasn't my business, but he got so mad at me, and we didn't talk for months. I got married, we really didn't talk. He came to my wedding, he was using, I knew that he was using,
Yeah.
he left early, he he was just different, he was mean, and, like, a mean that I had never seen before. And just going from us talking all the time, texting, seeing each other, to just now he's purposely not talking to me because I made him mad. And something that, like, I should have been able to talk to my dad about, it just turned and made him mad to where we didn't talk. And I think after I had found out again that he was doing drugs, I called him, and this is the first time that we have talked in months. And it's 10 or 11 o'clock at night. He should not be awake.
Yeah.
He's awake, and I this I said, "I just wanna know, are you doing drugs again?" And he said, "Yeah, but don't tell anyone." And I just remember I knew it already, but just to hear him say it was so hard. Um, it was just really hard.
Yeah. I can only imagine what kinda, especially as an adult, right? Like,
Right.
and, like, your thought process is completely different at this point, and you're able to understand and, like, know what it is.
Yeah.
And for him to just admit something like that to you, especially that you've had, this several years now of him, on the right path, or you thought, and, doing so well, and being this dad that you had never had before, what that would do to you on the inside.
Right, and it was like it just crushed me, and then it crushed me to hear him say it, which I was glad that he was truthful. I mean, I already knew,
Yeah,
but just to hear him say it just, like, wrecked my world.
yeah. How long after that, was it before his world come crumbling down in a sense?
So, I got married in November of 2021. I knew that he was using at that point. Um, I had my son in August of 2022. It was not long after I had my son that I get a Vine notification on my phone that he's been arrested. And I'm talking like 2 weeks after my firstborn is here, I get that Vine notification that he has been arrested. And I felt like I knew that it was coming,
Yeah,
but it hit harder knowing that I just had my first baby and my dad's about to go back to prison.
yeah, and for the listeners, if you guys don't know what Vine is, so there's a way, it's actually VineLink was created to, for people who had been impacted by crimes, like, for victims to be able to track their abuser and to know what was going on with their court cases, but any of us, like, and it's kinda sad that you even know how to use Vine, like,
Really?
I mean, like, that's not something that somebody should, have the knowledge of using. But you can put in their name and their offender number, and then link it to either, like, a phone number or an email, and it will send you updates. So, like, anything that's happening with that person, whether they have
Yeah.
court or they have, custody changes and they're going, anything, it will send you this little push notification to tell you, "Hey, this is what's going on."
And I remember I texted my grandma, his mom, my aunt, and his girlfriend at the time all in a group message, and I was hot because I don't think that it updated immediately when he was arrested, but maybe like a day or 2 later.
Yeah,
And I texted them all in a group message, and I was like, "So was no one gonna tell me that my dad got arrested?" And everyone knew, but no one had told me. And I just I knew that it was coming, but it still didn't make it any easier
right.
to actually see that come up on my phone that he's been arrested.
Now is this the arrest that he got the federal indictment behind?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that day. I remember, well, you don't know this, but, like, there were we have some good mutual friends, Nikki and Robbie, and they were kinda reaching out to me, and they were like, "Hey, you need to reach out to Brent, you need to try to reach out to him and see, help him," and I try to do my due diligence, right? Like, I would reach out to him and be like, "Let me get you help," like, "I can get you into any rehab, anywhere you wanna go, like, let me help you." And he was angry at me too, he was angry at them for even telling me, and then he was angry at me for butting in his business, and, because it happens like that, it doesn't matter how close we are or the relationship that we had, an active addiction, but whenever you see a person leave that life and live differently, and do something different with their lives, it kinda puts a strain on it, and I remember him telling me, like, "You think you're better than everybody," or something like that. I don't remember the exact words he said, and I was like, "It has nothing to do with that," like, I literally will do whatever, and but I did talk crazy to him, and I'm like, "Yeah, this is gonna be bad," like, "You have a horrible criminal history, and, you can't be ripping and running out there like that and not think that this is gonna end badly,
Right.
so let's change it now." You know, um, he wasn't willing, but that's like it is with so many of us. Like, I remember there were so many times in my life prior to me getting my own federal indictment, right? Like, that I had the perfect opportunity to do something different, and why I say that, like my kids getting taken, like that should have been enough right there. But I was so far in my addiction that my thought process was not, I couldn't even imagine it, like I couldn't imagine just there was never a good time to exit.
Right.
That's the lies I told myself, until eventually the law stepped in and made me exit, but that was what it took for me to do something different.
And all of his charges previously and his prison time that he had done was all state.
Yeah.
Till this last time, it was federal, so I knew that it was it was gonna be a long time, which sucked.
So how much time did they end up giving him?
Was it maybe 13?
I think like 13, 13 and a
13
half.
years, and then he serves 85% of that, which then sucked even more because I have 2 kids, and, I know that my dad would be a good grandpa,
Yeah.
so that's really hard.
Do you get to go see him? Have you been able to visit him any?
No, he is, up north, and so it's just not realistic for us to go, and it's also one of those things that, um, I had an uncle, my mom's brother, who is in prison, and, I had been going to see him ever since I was younger. Well, now looking back, when you think of that, it's like, why? And I don't ever want my kids to experience that. As much as I would love for them to know my dad and to see my dad and to have a relationship with him before he gets out, that is not a place for children. Um, I wish that I never had to go to see anyone in prison, and it's my job to protect my kids,
Yeah.
and we're not. We're not doing that.
There's one thing I can say, and I'm not saying this to, like, negate the fact of, like, your experience with him or any of that. I feel that, and I will always advocate for this, that we come from a horribly broken system. And I know just from watching so many people that I love from myself as well, right? Like, there were so many different moments in my life where the resources were never provided to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we look at Arkansas as a whole, and we literally are number one, like, in the very top, as far as incarceration rates go. But then you look at the treatment landscape, and what does that look like? You know what I mean? Like, why are people not being mandated to go to treatment? Like, in your mind, you think, he would never be open to that, but I can tell you in my mind, I didn't think I would either.
Right.
You can't ever underestimate the power of even planting the seed.
And I remember him when he first went to jail, he didn't know at the time that it was a federal indictment.
Mhm.
And he kept saying, I'm going to get into this,
The PAC program.
PACT program. He said, "I'm gonna get into this PACT program. I'm gonna get into this PACT program. I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna be clean. I'm gonna do what I'm supposed to be doing." That was not an option. This
Yeah.
was bigger than you can just go and do a program and then get out. Now you're serving federal time because of your crime.
Right.
And so I hope that in these next maybe, I guess 7 years now is probably what it is, that when he gets out and he's his little old man self, that he'll consider doing treatment because they're not giving him any sort of resources in prison, and he has been just about a lifelong addict,
Yeah.
and he needs resources to learn better coping skills,
Absolutely.
and whatever it is, he needs that, and I hope that he sees that now.
Yeah. I look at the system and it's really disheartening because I know people who are drug addicts, who made horrible decisions in their lives, get more time than people who have actually harmed, like physically harmed people,
Yes.
whether it be rape, molestation, beating women. Case in point, my kid's dad, like my youngest son's dad. At the time, whenever he caught the case behind trying to kill me, I ended up doing more time for a drug charge than he did for physically harming me.
Right, and that's like we were talking about before too, that the person who had the murder charge
Yeah,
got out in a quicker amount of time than my dad who has drug charges.
it's absolutely insane.
It's crazy that you can kill someone and get out quicker than someone who is using,
Drugs.
selling drugs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, you're an amazing person, Madison. And so for you guys, you don't know this. So Madison, I talk about this a lot too, is that the disease of it, like children who are children of addicts really have a superpower, right? Like, and it really can either go one or two ways. Either you see your parent, like there's this little story I remember hearing when I was in treatment. Like there was this alcoholic dad and he had these twin boys. And then one chose to become an alcoholic. And you ask him, why did you become an alcoholic? And he says, because I saw my dad do it.
Right.
Then you have the other kid who never drank a drop of alcohol in his life. And you ask him, like, why have you never drank alcohol? And he said, because I saw my dad do it.
And that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
Um, there's no way that I have seen how impactful it is and how it affects your family and it affects your friends and it affects your kids. And I saw another thing too that said, "As your daughter, I forgive you, but as a mother, I will never understand."
Yeah.
And I know that me never using drugs, it's hard to say that looking in because you did mention that, you don't choose to be an addict. But for me, it's hard because why are these drugs so important to you that you went back to doing these drugs
Absolutely.
and it's taken away from us and it's taken away from me and from my grandma and from my kids. And I mean, my kids don't even know. And I, I don't know.
It's hard. It's one of those things that, I wish I had the answer, you know what I mean? Like, I wish that I had the answer to tell you or to make you understand. I'm glad that I don't because I don't ever want you to understand what that feeling is like, I don't want it's hard. I blame it a lot on a failure of systems, when your dad caught his federal indictment, he was on parole, and it makes me wonder, like, you know, yes, he has to take accountability. We are not negating that fact that you have to take accountability for the actions and the things that you do. Like that's the damaging consequences. Like just like I had to go to prison too, it did not matter how much time I had in recovery before I went to prison. I still had to, face the consequences of my actions. But it makes you wonder, like, where was the parole office in all of this? Like where you know, believe like, we don't wanna believe this or not, but he was still custody of the state, and so you have to look at it like, Why was nobody intervening? Like, you're not gonna tell me that he was passing those drug tests, or was he going to parole, you know? Like, was he still in good standing with parole? Like, where does that, where's that disconnect, you know? And it's not just with his case, specifically, I see it all the time, you know? The resources are not provided,
Right.
the system is set up for failure. And, whenever you look at somebody, especially somebody like your dad who is genuinely institutionalized and he has been incarcerated so much of his life, where were the resources while he was inside that carceral system? You know what I mean? Like, where was the programming? Where we cannot, as a society, expect these people to be incarcerated for this long and they don't do anything with their time.
No.
They're in there, they give them a job, that they don't pay them for. You know what I mean? They work them. That's what they do. They work them. But what about the education component?
Right.
Like, what about the treatment component? What about the trauma component? You know what I mean? Like, why not work with these individuals? Because the reality is 92% of people who are incarcerated in Arkansas will eventually come back to the streets. You know what I mean? They will eventually come home. Like, we have to do better about providing these resources to them. There has to be better options. And what's something that's so sad, your dad has a gun charge. And so that gun charge will stop him. It'll prevent him from receiving drug treatment inside federal prison because he has that gun charge, even though that gun was not even on his person, like it wasn't used in the facilitation of a crime. They found it in a safe in the house, but because of that, they will say that he is not fit to receive drug treatment. Why? You
Right.
know what I mean? Why? Like, why not? Like, I can understand not giving him the time off credit, you know what I mean? But why? Why is he not fit to receive treatment?
And especially looking at his lengthy list of charges from previously. I mean, it's drug charge after drug charge after drug charge. So we know that this is a recurring issue. Why are we not doing anything to help him? Why are we not doing anything to help other people?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I hear it so much, like, you can't force anybody to wanna change, and that is true, you cannot, but if we are planting the seed, if we are providing the resources, anything is possible. Like, I am a living testament of that. When I found recovery, I was face down, beaten, broken in every sense of the word, and literally still didn't even know if I wanted to be clean, like, the very early part of my recovery was kinda rocky because I was going through the motions because I had a judge and I had a pretrial officer, her name is Allison, and she was a godsend to me in that moment. Like, she mentored me and pushed me and, she made sure that, like, she even went to the point of, like, setting me up with, I did trauma therapy before I went to prison. Like, she did that. And if we could even have a tenth of the empathy or the compassion that she had, this could look completely different.
Well, I was actually talking to my mom before this. And so another childhood memory that I have is before I went to my grandparents, it was after my mom and her husband were arrested. And I had one of her things that she had to do was she had to go to a treatment program. This was a treatment program in Little Rock. It is no longer there, but it was like a 4 to 6 month treatment program for women and their kids to go, and you had to stay there the whole time, but they gave you the resources, and it was, I think she said it was state funded.
Mhm.
Well, it's not there anymore.
Yeah,
And so we're missing a lot of
absolutely.
those recovery centers, those treatment programs for people that actually need to be there, that want to be there too. But my mom did say that she said, "I didn't want to go." She said, "The only reason that I went is because that's what I had to do to not go to prison."
Same,
But
but I still went, you know what I mean? I just knew if I did these things, maybe I wouldn't get as much time, that
yeah,
that was my only thought process.
yeah, and that's what she said. She was like, "There are people that want to go and they want to do better and better themselves, and then there are people that they just wanna go because that's what they're told to do, or
Right,
not even that they wanna go, that they have to go." And that was hers. She was going so that she could avoid going to prison, and she never ended up going to prison, but she did end up getting clean, and she's been clean for, like I said, 20 years.
right.
And so we also talked about what you have said in some of, because I can only watch the beginnings,
Mhm.
um, but trauma is the,
It is a
biggest
gateway.
thing.
Yeah.
It's the gateway, and my mom said people that say that marijuana is the gateway drug, they're crazy. She said that trauma is definitely a gateway drug.
Absolutely.
She experienced a lot of trauma. It's a little bit different for my dad because I don't really know that he experienced a lot of trauma, but he had a mom that worked all the time, and she worked 2 or 3 jobs all the time and was a single mom, so she wasn't there, but, I mean, definitely the trauma is definitely played a role in my mom, I know for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I can attest to this part of your dad because I've known your dad so long. How old are you?
26.
Yeah, I've known your dad. I mean, you were probably just being born or, when I first met your dad. Um, but like he grew up in the same neighborhood as my oldest kid's dad. And I can tell you that was traumatic enough in itself. Your dad grew up in a neighborhood in Jacksonville in the early 90s, that was the life that they lived. Like it was a lot of violence, it was a lot of gangs, it was a lot of drug dealing. Like that's the environment that he grew up in,
Yeah.
and that's traumatic, whether he wants to admit that as being a trauma or not, like that's what he was exposed to at a very young age because that was the culture.
And when mom's not home, that's
Right.
that's all he has.
And then you are a white individual in a predominantly black neighborhood trying to fit in, and that's what they did. Like that's what my kid's dad did. They grew up together. Like they literally, my kid's dad used to coach baseball for Brent and for his little brother when they were really young. Like he's known him his whole entire life, and so it was just a hard, the early 90s was like when banging in Little Rock was like a big thing, and that's what they partaked in, and so like, I hate to say it, but, like, whenever that's all that's what you resort back to,
Right.
and so that's the story for many people in addiction. I love a point that you made about, one of the biggest things that stops people from going into treatment, and the very first question that people ask, like, say, for instance, you're an individual and you're calling and you wanna get help. The very first question that somebody asks you on the phone when you call to get help is, "What insurance do you have?" you know? And let's be realistic, when we were in our active addiction, I promise you I was doing nothing to take care of myself. I was not going to the doctor, I was not going to the dentist, I was not doing anything. And I had no insurance. You know what I mean? So I was very fortunate enough to go into a state-funded facility where, they paid for it. But that's the problem is that state fund money is only so much and it runs out, you know? I will keep advocating for that until my last breath about how our tax dollars need to be spent on rehabilitating Arkansas. We're literally losing a generation in Arkansas, whether it's to overdoses or incarceration. Everybody that we know and love is either dying or going to prison for a really long time. And then ones that are going to prison are coming back out, and it's just a repeated cycle.
Right.
It's a never ending cycle.
Well, and why are we building a new prison when we could take that money and put it to recovery, put it to
Absolutely.
treatment programs?
Listen, I did a breakdown on it, right? So this new prison that the governor is wanting to construct will cost $825 million. So when you hear that number, if we took 2%, and you think 2%, that's not enough, 2% of $825 million is $16,500,000. If we took 2% of that money and we poured it back into the community, into rehabilitation services, into treatment, mandating individuals with drug problems to go into a long-term recovery-based program, and if that didn't work, then put them in behind bars, into peer-driven services and prevention, you would watch the landscape of Arkansas change. I'm so fortunate enough that I'm able to be really immersed into this community, and I watch these diversion sentencing programs. There's a couple of them, like the PAT program, but mainly the CSI program that's in Pulaski County, and their numbers are remarkable. Like, the recidivism rate is minimal. Like, Arkansas recidivism rate right now is like 47%, and there's somewhere approximately close to 70,000 individuals in the state of Arkansas who are on some type of parole and probation. Like, the CSI program is changing lives. The PAC program, I mean, there's a lot of them that are changing lives. Why is that? And I keep asking myself this, like, why is this data not being used to show that recovery does work?
Right.
It works.
And I have seen the PACT program work for so many of the same people that we know,
Yeah,
and we need more of that. We need more.
we need more. Thank you, Madison, so much for coming on today to talk to me. So, the thing I love to close with, and I'm glad that you don't ever watch them all the way through, is I love asking everybody that comes on the podcast if there is one message that you could leave to the world, whether it be somebody like you, maybe they're a family member who has a person who's incarcerated or an addiction. Maybe it's to the addict from the child's perspective. If there was a message that you could leave for the world, what would it be?
This is hard. I think as the daughter of 2 recovering addicts, I guess you could consider my dad recovering, he doesn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Um, I think as the daughter of 2 recovering addicts that I would say, like, we love you no matter what. Um, it it breaks your heart more than anything to see someone that you love so much. And then there's nothing that you can do. Um, but especially to, like, my dad. Um, there's nothing that he could do that would make me love him any less. And I think a lot of, children of addicts feel the same way that there's nothing that you can do to make me not love you, and to want better for you. And it's also hard as a kid or even as an adult now, um, like, why am I trying to tell you this? Um, but I want the best for, my dad or whatever, um, and just that I love them no matter what, and we want them to be successful and to recover and to use what they learn to help other people. Um, especially like you. I mean, what you do and you help other people and you bring other people to recovery. Um, I think that's really important.
Thank you, friend. Well, you guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Breaking Quiet. Madison, you did amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to be transparent, to be vulnerable, and to tell your story because your story, it's okay. It's okay. Your story matters. Your feelings matter, just like the feelings of everybody else does. If you guys are listening and you haven't subscribed yet, go to Long Term, a podcast in recovery on YouTube and subscribed. You can listen to Breaking Quiet on all major platforms from Apple to Spotify, any place that you can listen to a podcast. Also, if you haven't, if you could see my shirt, go and download the app Revive AR. Revive AR is an app for Arkansans that gives you all the resources across the state of Arkansas, whether it's for treatment, for Narcan, for mental health, substance use, no matter what it is. If you are looking for resources for yourself or for a community member or your family, download Revive AR. Thank you guys for listening.